Episode 4 of Ahsoka is finally here, and what an episode this was. There is a ton to get through, so let's get straight into it. We begin the episode titled Fallen Jedi with Sabine trying to make contact with Home 1. Their transmitter, which was damaged during the previous episode, is currently being fixed by Huyang. We then get a pretty interesting scene that sets up the coming conflict in this particular episode, as Ahsoka tells Sabine that there is a chance that she might have to sacrifice the possibility of finding Ezra in order to prevent Thrawn's return. Sabine tries to dismiss this possibility, but it becomes pretty clear that this is a reality that she will have to face sooner rather than later. And Sabine's inability to come to terms with the fact or to make the hard decision also harkens back to what Ezra was telling her in his recording.
As a Jedi, sometimes you have to make the decision no one else can.
And so, in a way, Sabine is unable to achieve her full potential as a Jedi precisely because of her inability to make the hard decisions, the sort of decisions that a Jedi must be ready and able to make. Ahsoka also briefly mentions
and allowing Thrawn's return as heir to the Empire.
Which was a scene that we've seen in the trailers, and Heir to the Empire does of course reference the book in which it features Thrawn's return in Star Wars Legends, the book that this show has likely taken lots of inspiration from. Huyang goes to work outside the ship, and we see that an HK assassin droid has been watching them from a distance. We then cut to Baylan and Shin reports that they've managed to find Ahsoka's ship. Baylan tells the magistrate that they should get underway soon, and the magistrate questions if that is a note of fear in Baylan's voice, to which Baylan responds that it is experience, giving us a hint that his familiarity with Ahsoka's capabilities might be more extensive than we have previously realized, a familiarity that might be rooted in what Baylan knows about Anakin and Ahsoka's adventures during the Clone Wars. Huyang gets ambushed by the HK droid, and to be fair to the old tin, he does put up quite a bit of a good fight. Throughout the hand-to-hand scene, you can actually see that he makes use of his other two arms that he used to train Sabine. But what is really interesting is that for the most part, Huyang fights in a very defensive manner. Now, this could be due to the sheer ferocity of the HK assassin droid, or more interestingly, it could also be due to Huyang's embodiment of the defensive nature of the Jedi Order, which would put his fighting style very similar to that of Kenobi, who was also reliant on defense. Sabine and Ahsoka enter the battle, and they make quick work of the enemy, and the fight also showcases just how well Ahsoka and Sabine work together, covering for each other through their respective combat styles, and something to take note about this episode is just how well done the action scenes are, but more on that later. Ahsoka and Sabine set out to find the star map, but before they can leave, Huyang tells them to
stay together. You always did better that way.
An advice which is sadly not followed, as we will see later. We cut to Hera, Jason, and Chopper as they decide to help out Ahsoka and Sabine, essentially disobeying orders, which is just classic rebel activity. Just as she leaves Home 1, we then see a squadron of X-Wings form up behind the Ghost, and among the pilots is none other than Captain Carson Teva, the New Republic pilot that we've seen repeatedly throughout The Mandalorian and now here, essentially creating some connective tissue between the various shows. Although interestingly enough, Zeb is still missing from the action. We then hear the iconic phrase,
"Once a rebel, always a rebel."
On your signal, Phoenix Leader.
Which every Star Wars Rebel fans will be familiar with, and off they go into hyperspace. Back on Cetos, Baylan is somewhat concerned about Elspeth's hyperspace calculations, and the magistrate tells him to have faith, which he claims he lost a long time ago, again hinting to the dark history between him and the Jedi Order. Ahsoka and Sabine make their way through the forest, but waiting for them are Shin and Marok. In what is essentially round 2 of each of their respective duels, Shin faces off against Sabine, while Marok faces off against Ahsoka, and the way the scenes are shot and the way tension is held is simply amazing. Another interesting thing to note is how much Ahsoka's fighting style has changed. No longer solely relying on acrobatic dual wielding, she now prefers a more simplistic style to her lightsaber combat. And there is a lot of inspiration taken from Japanese sword fighting in this show, even between Shin and Sabine's fight. Ahsoka ends Marok, who bursts into green vapor/dust, and Sabine tells her to go after the map while she handles Shin. Essentially, the two decide to split up against the wishes of Huyang, a decision that does end quite badly. Ahsoka arrives at the reflex point, and here's where things get really interesting. Baylan mentions that Anakin spoke highly of Ahsoka, but Ahsoka then states that Anakin never mentioned him, which is clearly intended as an insult, perhaps as a way to destabilize her opponent. But Baylan is pretty undisturbed as he continues on talking about how Anakin's eventual transformation into Darth Vader, which essentially confirms that he is well aware of the events that took place towards the end of the Clone Wars. Baylan then accuses Ahsoka of Anakin's fall being the reason for why she walked away and abandoned him, and while as much as this is untrue, it definitely shakes Ahsoka. As established in an earlier episode, Anakin's fall essentially led to Ahsoka questioning her decision to walk away. There is a guilt within her that has prevented her from moving forward, and Baylan's decision to expose this has clearly unsettled her.
I'm not here to discuss my past,
giving Baylan the first victory. As the two ignite their sabers and begin to engage each other, notice how different Ahsoka approaches Baylan compared to when she approached Marok. There is clearly much more caution, and the duel between the two really reflects just how experienced both warriors are. Notice as Ahsoka changes her stance, Baylan also subtly shifts to reflect the change in situation. Whereas with Marok, Ahsoka holds her stances despite Marok's change in stance, reflecting that she has much more respect for Baylan as a warrior than she did for the former Inquisitor. And the scene is just executed so well as not only do both warriors measure each other, but during their first clash, both of them pull away briefly, testing each other as seasoned warriors would do. We briefly cut back to Shin and Sabine's duel, and Shin clearly gets the upper hand, but not before Sabine essentially slaps her in the face with the Force. And just when Shin thinks she has won, Sabine pulls off a neat Mandalorian trick, something which she has been known to do in Rebels. And Kanan does point out that while these tricks will help her out from time to time, it's unlikely that the same trick will work twice the next time both of them duel.
These tricks will amount to something, maybe save you from time to time, but they won't keep you alive in the long run. Only training and discipline will do that.
Ahsoka makes a grab at the star map, which ends up burning her hand, and Shin makes a tactical retreat. As Shin arrives at the reflex point, Ahsoka infers from Shin's arrival that Sabine must be dead. And this momentary distraction and emotional turbulence results in a momentary surge of power but ultimately unbalances her, giving Baylan the opportunity to gain the upper hand. Sabine also arrives at the reflex point, and Ahsoka tells her to destroy the orb, but Sabine's hesitation allows Baylan to knock Ahsoka off the cliff. And although Sabine continues to threaten to destroy the orb, Baylan smartly negotiates his way around it. He convinces Sabine through the promise of finding Ezra, and at the same time, we also get to learn what really happened to Sabine's family. According to Baylan, Clan Ren died on Mandalore, likely referencing the Night of 1,000 Tears, which was previously discussed in the Book of Boba Fett, answering the question about where Sabine's family is and also giving much more weight as to why she is so desperate to find Ezra. In many ways, Sabine is alone in this galaxy, with Hera off to do her general duties, Zeb as a New Republic pilot, and Ahsoka's choice to walk away from her. Sabine really doesn't have anyone left. And this lends so much more credibility as to why she is so desperate to find Ezra. Additionally, Baylan also plants the idea that the death of Sabine's family was due to Ahsoka's inability to trust her, which is likely something that will be explored in later episodes. But this little tidbit of information could very well change the way we perceive Ahsoka and Sabine's decision to part ways. Baylan then says,
"Do it."
Which also echoes another famous dark side user.
Do it.
Sabine ends up handing over the orb, and just before that, you can really see the conflict within her, really just superb acting. Hera and the New Republic arrive, Baylan destroys the star map, essentially ensuring that no one will be following them, and Team Thrawn makes the jump to hyperspace, and the energy unleashed ends up destroying a few X-Wings, but what is really interesting is the trail of light that we see when the jump is made. Very much reminiscent of the Holdo maneuver in The Last Jedi. Jason says,
I've got a bad feeling.
Another iconic Star Wars line and confirmation that he is indeed Force sensitive, much like his father. We cut back to Ahsoka, who slowly wakes up, but instead of being at the bottom of the ocean, Ahsoka appears to be in a realm known as the World Between Worlds, the very same one Ezra used to save Ahsoka during her duel with Vader. But what is an even bigger surprise is, And as a Clone Wars fan, I was squealing at this point, because let's be honest here, we've all wanted to hear Hayden Christensen's Anakin say this in live action. Although I'm pretty sure they did mix in Anakin's animation voice with Hayden's to merge the two together. Ahsoka turns around and we then get to see Anakin dressed in his Clone Wars outfit, which is insane as well. Although what is really interesting is that while Ahsoka is clearly happy to see her former master, the soundtrack in the background does subtly slide into a few notes of Vader's theme. Perhaps suggesting that Anakin's appearance may not be as good of a thing as we all hoped it would be. And this episode, titled Fallen Jedi, makes reference to several different characters in this episode. We could take it as a reference to Balin's past as a Jedi, a reference to Anakin, or even a reflection of Sabine's decision to give up the orb. This was definitely by far my favorite episode. Anyways, that's all for this video. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.